Previously, we explored the life of a forgotten king, Thutmose II, a sickly pharaoh overshadowed by his powerful wife, Hatshepsut, and we followed the century-long search for his missing tomb. A mystery that left generations of archaeologists empty-handed. Now, in part 2, the story continues. We step into 2025, when a sealed chamber was finally uncovered. Inside lay fragments of a burial that could belong to the lost pharaoh. But is it truly his tomb, or another puzzle in the desert sands? Join us as we uncover the clues, the controversies, and the legacy of a discovery that could rewrite Egypt's history. When the chamber was first entered, archaeologists expected chaos. And that is exactly what they found. The sarcophagus was cracked. The lid had been shifted in antiquity. The bones inside were incomplete, damaged, and fragile. Looters had been here long ago. But among the rubble, clues remained. Clues that hinted at a royal identity. Clues that suggested the occupant might have been Thutmose II. The first clue was the sarcophagus itself. It was carved from limestone, simple in form, but large enough for a king. Traces of paint survived in small patches. Once, it had been brightly decorated with red and yellow pigments. On the sides, faint carvings of protective gods could still be seen. Isis with her outstretched wings. Anubis, guardian of the dead. Horus the falcon, watching over the king. These were not the images of a nobleman, they were the symbols of royal protection. Nearby, archaeologists found fragments of wooden furniture. Broken legs of a ceremonial bed. Splintered remains of a gilded chair. The craftsmanship was exquisite, even in pieces. Such furniture was reserved for the highest ranks of Egyptian society. Then came the amulets. Scattered across the burial floor were dozens of small objects. Tiny scarabs carved from green stone. Amulets in the shape of the ankh, the symbol of life. Protective charms of the Eye of Horus. Some were broken, others intact, but one stood out. A golden amulet bearing the double uraeus, the two cobras of pharaonic authority. This was no charm for a commoner. It was a royal marker. Archaeologists carefully catalogued each object. Every bead, every charm, every splinter of wood was recorded. Because each could carry a clue to the identity of the tomb's owner. And then came the inscriptions. On fragments of plaster fallen from the walls, traces of hieroglyphs survived. Most were too faded to read. But a few carried partial names. Cartouches broken in half. One fragment showed the signs for Thut. Another seemed to carry the symbol for Mose. Together, they suggested a name. Thutmose. The discovery ignited debate. Some scholars declared it proof. Others warned that broken fragments could mislead. Perhaps the name belonged to a different Thutmose. Perhaps it was reused material from another burial. Still, the possibility was electrifying. For the first time, the name of Thutmose appeared within the chamber itself. If authentic, it meant this could indeed be his tomb. The human remains also carried hints. The skeleton showed signs of disease. The bones revealed lesions consistent with a skin condition. Evidence of weakness in the joints. Age at death, early 30s. Ancient texts described Thutmose II as a sickly king. His reign short. His health poor. The bones matched the legend. Another striking clue came from the burial style itself. Unlike the grand tombs of later pharaohs, this chamber was modest. The walls were roughly cut. Decoration was minimal. It looked unfinished, as if the work had been rushed. This fit the timeline of a ruler who died young. A king whose reign ended before his tomb could be completed. A burial prepared in haste, with less grandeur than expected. But mysteries remained. Why was the tomb in Saqqara, not in the Valley of the Kings? Why were the inscriptions so few and so damaged? Why had the sarcophagus been left so vulnerable to looting? Some historians proposed a theory that Hatshepsut herself may have diverted resources from her husband's burial. Perhaps she intended to overshadow his memory with her own monuments. Perhaps she saw little need to glorify a weak, short reign. Others suggested the tomb was a reburial. That priests, centuries later, moved his remains to Saqqara for protection. In times of turmoil, this was common. Bodies of kings were relocated, hidden, disguised to escape destruction. The artifacts themselves seemed to support both views. Some were crafted in the style of the early 18th dynasty. But others looked slightly later, as if added in a second burial. The mixture deepened the puzzle. Epigraphers studied the inscriptions fragment by fragment. Each mark of a reed brush. Each stroke of a chisel. They compared them to known monuments of Thutmose II. The style matched, but not perfectly. The debate grew louder. Meanwhile, conservators worked to preserve the fragile finds. The amulets were stabilized. The wooden fragments treated to prevent decay. The sarcophagus reinforced with hidden supports. Every artifact was a piece of a larger story. The media focused on the dramatic fragments of the name. The cartouches with Thut and Mose headlines declared the pharaoh found. But in academic halls, the discussions were cautious. Some pointed out that Egypt had many Thutmoses, from the first through the fourth. Could the fragments belong to another? Could this tomb be an unknown prince, rather than a king? Yet the combination of evidence was compelling. Royal amulets, cartouches with his name, a skeleton matching his age and sickness, a chamber built with haste. Together, they painted a portrait that aligned with the forgotten king. As the investigation deepened, one truth became clear. This was no ordinary tomb. It was royal. It carried the weight of a dynasty. And whether or not it belonged to Thutmose II, it would rewrite history. For archaeologists, the clues were thrilling. For historians, they were maddening. For the public, they were enchanting. Every artifact raised new questions. Every inscription hinted at answers. Every bone carried the possibility of a name. And in the quiet of the desert chamber, one mystery remained. Had the world finally found the pharaoh nobody could find? Every discovery about Thutmose II leads to one unavoidable figure: his wife. His half-sister, the woman who would one day rule Egypt as pharaoh, Hatshepsut. To understand the tomb, we must understand her. Hatshepsut was not an ordinary queen. She was the daughter of Thutmose I and his great royal wife Mose. Her bloodline was pure, her status supreme. She grew up in the heart of the royal court. From an early age, she was trained in ritual, politics, and power. In temple reliefs, her presence is unusually dominant for a queen. She appears side by side with her husband. She is shown offering sacrifices to the gods. She is sometimes depicted larger than Thutmose himself. This has led historians to ask a bold question. Was Hatshepsut already preparing for more than queenship? Was she already positioning herself for ultimate authority? Thutmose II's reign was short. He died young, possibly in his early 30s. His son, Thutmose III, was still a child. Hatshepsut stepped forward. At first, she acted as regent, ruling on behalf of her stepson. But soon, she did something extraordinary. She crowned herself pharaoh, she wore the royal headdress, she adopted the false beard of kingship. She had herself depicted as a male ruler in statues and reliefs. For over 20 years, she ruled as Egypt's most powerful woman. But what does this have to do with the tomb? everything. If the 2025 discovery truly belongs to Thutmose II, then Hatshepsut's role must be considered. Did she oversee the burial? Did she hide it? Did she deliberately minimize it to elevate herself? The chamber in Saqqara raises these questions sharply. Why was the tomb modest? Why unfinished? Why placed far from the Valley of the Kings, where the dynasty's great rulers were buried? Some scholars argue that Hatshepsut herself was responsible. Perhaps she chose a less prominent tomb for her husband. Perhaps she redirected resources away from him and toward her own monuments. She built massive temples at Karnak. She ordered the construction of her grand mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. She poured wealth into projects that glorified her name. Did that come at the expense of his memory? Others believe she may have moved him. That Thutmose was originally buried in the Valley of the Kings. But later, during her reign, he was reburied in Saqqara. Why? Possibly to secure his remains from political rivals. Possibly to keep him close to the capital, where she held power. The artifacts also hint at her hand. Some of the inscriptions appear incomplete. Some cartouches seem erased or altered. This could mean that Hatshepsut's builders reused old materials. Or it could mean she intentionally obscured his identity. We know that later in her reign, Hatshepsut was careful about controlling royal memory. She celebrated her father, Thutmose I. She carefully managed the image of her stepson, Thutmose III. But her husband, Thutmose II, appears only rarely. It is as if he slipped between the cracks of official history. This silence could have been strategy. Hatshepsut may have wanted to present herself as the true heir of her father. She may have preferred to connect her reign directly to Thutmose I, skipping over her weak husband. If so, minimizing his tomb was part of that plan. The bones in the tomb tell another story. Signs of disease. Weakness in life. Historians believe Thutmose was frail, possibly unfit for kingship. If that is true, Hatshepsut may have found it easier to dominate the court. A sickly king meant a powerful queen, but when he died, she faced a choice. Glorify his memory with a monumental tomb, or allow him to fade, while she rose higher. The evidence suggests she chose the latter. This is why the discovery matters. If the Saqqara tomb is truly his, then it reveals her strategy. It shows how she balanced respect for her husband with her own ambitions. It explains why his resting place was modest, incomplete, and hidden. Yet, it also complicates her story. Hatshepsut has long been praised as a brilliant female ruler. She brought peace and prosperity, she expanded trade, she built temples that still awe visitors today. But the tomb suggests another side. A woman willing to diminish her husband's memory to secure her own power. Still, not all scholars agree. Some argue that blaming Hatshepsut is unfair. Perhaps the modest tomb was simply the result of his early death. Perhaps he died before his grand tomb could be finished. Perhaps priests centuries later moved him to Saqqara, long after her reign. The debate is fierce. Each artifact is weighed for hidden meaning. Each inscription is studied for political bias. Each clue sparks a new theory. What is clear is this: the tomb cannot be separated from Hatshepsut. Her shadow falls over every wall, every inscription, every fragment. To study the burial is to study her ambition. To examine the bones is to measure her choices. In a way, the tomb is as much hers as his. Not because she was buried there, but because she shaped how it was built, how it was remembered, and how it was forgotten. The Hatshepsut connection transforms the 2025 discovery. It is no longer just the story of a lost king. It is the story of a queen who rewrote history. A queen who blurred the memory of her husband to carve her own path. And yet, the mystery deepens. Because if she shaped his burial, what else did she shape? Did she move his body? Did she erase his name? Or did she leave just enough behind for us to find 3,000 years later? The tomb whispers both answers and silences. It shows us amulets of kingship. It shows us bones of sickness. It shows us cartouches half carved and half erased, and behind all of it, the presence of Hatshepsut looms. The 2025 discovery is not only about Thutmose. It is about the woman who stood beside him. The woman who stepped past him. The woman who may have hidden him. And the woman who, through her choices, ensured that when his tomb was finally found, it would tell her story as much as his. Every great discovery in Egypt comes with excitement. But it also comes with doubt. The 2025 tomb was no exception. As soon as the announcement was made, voices of skepticism rose. The first point of doubt was the inscriptions. The cartouches were broken. The hieroglyphs incomplete. Yes, fragments seemed to spell Thutmose, but the 18th dynasty had more than one Thutmose. There was Thutmose I, Thutmose III, even Thutmose IV in later years. Could the fragments belong to another? The second point of doubt was location. Why would a pharaoh of the 18th dynasty be buried in Saqqara? By tradition, their burials were in Thebes, in the Valley of the Kings. Luxor, not Cairo. For skeptics, Saqqara made no sense. Some argued it could not be an original burial. They suggested it was a later reburial. Priests, in times of chaos, may have moved the king here. But if so, why leave so few inscriptions? Why no clear markers? Why no protective texts to guide the pharaoh in the afterlife? The third doubt concerned the quality of the tomb. It was modest, unfinished, poorly decorated compared to other royal burials. Would a pharaoh really be laid to rest in such a place? Or was it more likely the burial of a prince? Or even a high-ranking noble with royal connections? Skeptics also pointed to the condition of the remains. The skeleton was incomplete. The bones were damaged. The sarcophagus had been violated long ago. There was no golden mask. No rich treasure. No clear royal regalia. For comparison, think of Tutankhamun. Even after looting attempts, his tomb contained thousands of objects. Gold shrines, jewelry, weapons, furniture. By contrast, the Saqqara tomb held only fragments. Was this really the burial of a king? DNA evidence was the next battlefield. Tests were promised, but results were not immediate. Egyptian authorities guarded access tightly. Samples were taken from the bones. Comparisons planned with other royal mummies. But without results, the claim remained uncertain. Some Egyptologists remembered the controversy of KV 55. That tomb contained a mysterious mummy. At different times it was identified as Akhenaten, Smenkhare, or Tutankhamun's father. Decades of debate followed. The Saqqara tomb risked becoming another KV 55. A royal burial shrouded in endless argument. Others pointed to political motives. Egypt's government relies heavily on archaeology for tourism. Every new discovery brings global headlines. Every headline brings visitors and revenue. Was the announcement too fast? Was the label, Lost Pharaoh, a publicity move rather than a proven fact? Western scholars were especially cautious. Some accused Egyptian officials of exaggeration. They demanded peer-reviewed studies, not press conferences. They warned that excitement should not replace evidence. At conferences, debates grew heated. Supporters pointed to the amulets, the cartouches, the skeleton's age. Skeptics countered with tradition, location, and missing proof. Each side cited history. Each side claimed logic. But certainty remained elusive. Even the tomb's architecture raised doubts. The corridors were short. The chamber small. Royal tombs, even unfinished, usually showed greater ambition. Some argued it looked more like a burial shaft for a nobleman. Others said the unfinished style was precisely what proved it belonged to a king who died too soon. The amulets also came under fire. Yes, some bore royal symbols. But amulets could be reused. Objects moved from one burial to another. Was the double uraeus truly original to this tomb? Or was it placed there later by priests? The skeleton itself raised questions. Yes, it showed signs of disease. Yes, the age at death matched the short reign of Thutmose II. But no inscription directly named him. Without DNA, the identification was weak. For skeptics, the case was circumstantial. Fragments of names, fragments of furniture. Fragments of a story pieced together by hope. They demanded more. Clear inscriptions. Unbroken cartouches. DNA confirmation. Until then, they refused to call it the tomb of Thutmose II. Some even suggested the discovery was misinterpreted. Perhaps it was not a king's tomb at all. Perhaps it belonged to a powerful courtier. A general, a priest. Someone allowed to use royal symbols, but not a pharaoh himself. The debate spilled into the media. Headlines screamed of a lost king. But in academic journals, articles questioned every claim. One archaeologist called it wishful thinking in stone. Another wrote, "We have a tomb, but we do not have a king." The public loved the drama. But for historians, it was a reminder. Egypt is full of mysteries. For every discovery, there are layers of uncertainty. For every answer, new questions emerge. The skeptics were not dismissing the importance of the tomb. They agreed it was significant. A major royal burial. A window into the early 18th dynasty. But they warned against rushing to crown the occupant. History demands patience. Still, hope remained alive. Even the harshest critics admitted the clues were intriguing. If DNA matched him to other Thutmoside mummies, the debate would end. If new inscriptions were uncovered, the case would strengthen. If future analysis confirmed royal status, skeptics would yield. Until then, the tomb stood in limbo. A burial chamber caught between certainty and speculation. For believers, it was the lost pharaoh. For doubters, it was just another mystery. In the end, both sides agreed on one point. The discovery was monumental. It forced scholars to re-examine history. It challenged assumptions about burial traditions. And it brought Thutmose II back into conversation after centuries of silence. But was it truly his tomb? Or simply another royal shadow mistaken for the man who vanished from history? That question, as of 2025, remained unanswered. Every great discovery in Egypt is more than bones and stone.